In this vlog, I'm going to talk about 10 ways to prevent or overcome elbow tendinosis, a very common injury for climbers. Just at the weekend there, I was doing an interview for Andrew MacFarlane's channel. He has a great YouTube channel talking about lots of aspects about training for climbing. And because Andrew was aware of my book on climbing injuries, Make or Break, he travelled up to interview me. On Andrew's channel, he deals a lot with his own progress in climbing, trying to move from the kind of mid-grades in climbing up towards the upper grades, especially in bouldering. And he is obviously worried about the prospect of injury. Injury is something that affects nearly all climbers at some point in their career, and often it can be the deciding factor in your success. That's actually why when I wrote Make or Break, the subtitle is "Don't Let Climbing Injuries Dictate Your Success," because often it really does. I will link to the interview that I did with Andrew and recommend that you follow his channel. And likewise, if some of you have come from Andrew's channel, then please do subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications bell to make sure you see my new videos. I regularly publish videos and will keep doing that on all aspects of training and improving at climbing. That's what I love doing. In the interview with Andrew, we spoke very generally about injury and injury prevention and the basic principles of taking care of your body as an athlete and making it last. And a lot of those general principles I go through in my book, Make or Break. And I thought it would be nice to complement that interview by going into something a bit more specific. In the interview with Andrew, we went into a little bit of detail on finger injuries, specifically pulley injuries. And obviously there's a whole section on that, a whole chapter on that in Make or Break. But one of the things that we didn't really get into was elbow injuries in detail. Now, I went through a period of around 5 to 7 years, really. 5 years of really suffering badly with golfer's elbow. That's tendinosis of the common flexor tendon on the inside of the elbow, in both elbows. And I also had some tennis elbow as well. And it really blighted my climbing for several years. And so I thought it would be nice to do a video going into the detail of my story around my progress through that journey of being injured and recovering from it. And I'll go through some specific concrete things that you can do both to prevent that injury and also to manage it and treat it and resolve it. And that's actually the first point that I want to make. If you have already got golfer's elbow, and for most people it's a very troublesome injury and it's very reluctant to clear completely. And so the first thing I want to say is it is possible to resolve this injury. I thought for several years that I would be suffering from golfer's elbow for the rest of my climbing career, and that as long as I was climbing it would keep coming back because nothing I seemed to be doing seemed to make any significant impact on it. It just stayed the same or gradually got worse or extended to other tendons on my elbows. But now, at the age of 41, I have not had any symptoms of golfer's elbow for 3 years, and I never even think about my elbows. Even to this day, when I do a deep lock off, when I'm, especially on an ice axe, when I'm placing gear or something like that, I don't even think about my elbows. There's just no pain at all in them, and they're completely 100% better. And so that's the first message, is that you can get over this if you do everything right. Before I first got elbow tendinosis, I was terrified of it. In my 20s, as I observed other peers who I looked up to in climbing, some of the best climbers in Scotland who I would see at the crags or in the climbing wall, as they moved into their 30s and 40s, one by one I watched them get this injury, and I was terrified of it because it seemed to be the kind of grim reaper of your climbing career. You would see these climbers come in and they were fit and strong and they'd done a lot of hard routes, and then you wouldn't see them for a few years, and then you would suddenly see them at an event or maybe at the climbing wall and they looked totally different. The fit, strong, healthy athlete that you remember from a few years ago had moved on to a much older, less fit, less muscled climber that just looked old and not able to perform. And you would say, "How are you doing?" And they would say, "Oh, well, okay, but I'm not climbing much these days. I've had this terrible golfer's elbow and I just can't clear it." And when I saw multiple climbers experience this problem, I thought, goodness, I hope I never get that injury. And so when at the age of 28, I first noticed it in my right elbow, I was dismayed and I thought I must get on top of this. But nothing I seemed to do made any difference. I tried resting it, stretching it, and all of the sort of standard treatments, which included things like taking anti-inflammatories from my basic sports medicine textbooks at the time. None of that made any difference, and a year later I then got it in the other elbow, and for 2 or 3 years it just got steadily worse no matter what I did. Now, that first appearance of golfer's elbow started in the late 2008 when I was climbing really well, and it wasn't until about 4 years later, when I was at a point of despair with this injury, that I started to make some moves that finally led towards me resolving it. For 4 years I avoided training, really. I climbed, but I didn't really train properly. I stopped fingerboarding, I stopped doing basic physical training. I climbed a lot of hard trad slabs. All of that was quite good fun, but it wasn't what I was really wanting to be doing. I hoped that by stepping back in the intensity of my training would give the tendon a chance to recover. So I was still approaching it with a "this tendon needs rest" mentality. And after 4 years, I realized that had failed. In fact, the tendon was just worse. I also tried resting completely for a while, and that didn't work either. So after 4 years, I got to the stage of thinking, I need to really lean into this problem and attack it properly. And it was through my own research that I started to make some progress, and that's why I decided to write this book, because what I was finding in the research, some of it was very detailed, complex, nuanced concepts that would need a fair bit of explanation. And some of it was brain dead simple rehab exercises, super simple stuff that was just information that was in the research literature that wasn't getting out there to climbers, and I didn't know about it. And I could see that it could make a huge difference, and it started to make a difference to my elbows. And so that's how I ended up writing Make or Break. I think it's fair to say that in previous decades, there's been a strong focus in sports medicine on treating the symptoms of injury, and that has steadily moved on to looking at the root causes of injury and trying to address those and remove those in order that both injuries can be prevented but also treated. So much of the 10 things that I'm about to go through are relevant to both prevention and treatment. Now, I guess that a lot of people who don't yet have golfer's elbow will not watch this video, and I made this appeal in the book as well to say that prevention should be the sort of core strategy for any responsible athlete looking after their body. Once you get an injury, it's not too late, but it would have been better if you had addressed these issues sooner. So I would say that the first 5 points relate quite strongly to prevention, but also treatment, and the second 5 points are more focused on once you have the injury. So let's get into them. Point number 1 is take ownership over the injury. This injury is about slow onset degeneration of the quality of the tissue itself. It follows that there's something or a number of things in your routine or your environment that are causing that tendon to degenerate, and many or potentially all of those are modifiable risk factors that you can do something about. Now, there are some headline big hitters that are common to many people, and we'll go through them in a second, but there are also some individual factors that, there's always a balance of all these different separate strands of inputs to injury, and it's your job to try and figure out which ones are relevant to you. I think it's fair to say that no one medical practitioner, even if they are very, very highly qualified and expert in their field, are able to deal with that whole aspect. You may, in your journey through recovering from this injury, see orthopedic surgeons who are very experienced at treating the symptoms of this injury, but they may not understand the nuance and subtlety of how this injury could arise through training errors in a sport like climbing, because they don't climb. Similarly, you might have a climbing coach who may be able to point out some obvious errors in your technique or your training setup that may contribute to the injury, but they may not know the intricacies of how to deal with symptoms once you have the injury. So there are all of these different strands, and really you have to be the manager of all those things, and that's something that I go into detail on in Make or Break, is how to manage your interaction with medical staff. Just to give one example of that, I have a whole section on how to manage your visit to the doctor or specialist that you're going to see to either for diagnosis or treatment of your injury. Sometimes doctors can be fantastic at offering you the treatments that they are able to offer you. That's great, that's what they should do. But one aspect that I drew attention to in Make or Break was that medical staff rarely go through with you who else you should be seeing, what other strands that they are not expert in, but maybe they would suggest that you follow up on. That is, they may not say, what does your climbing coach say? What does your physiotherapist say? All these different things. That role of managing it falls to you, and you should take ownership over that. Point 2 is to be strong, to strengthen the whole upper body and actually your whole body generally. One of the things that's clear in the research on risk factors for injury is that just pure physical strength protects against injury. The exact reasons for this are not actually 100% resolved, but logically, if you're stronger, then you're less likely to exceed the breaking strength of your tissue, and therefore that may lower your injury risk. You're also maybe more resilient to correcting a movement error, a technical error, which may lead to an injury, both a macro acute tear, but also the small micro tears that accumulate from day to day in your training. So as a general rule for a climber, a comprehensive routine of strengthening your entire upper body is a generally prudent idea for both prevention and also treatment of golfer's elbow once you have it. From the available research, it's not really possible to identify single exercises that are the highest priority. It's just very difficult in studies to tease out the signal from the noise with these things. One of the concepts that's been put forward in the medical literature relates to weakness further up in the kinetic chain in the core, the shoulder and the upper arm, then forcing more force on to more distal areas of the body. So in practice that means that if you have a weak shoulder, you have less control over your movements, and therefore the wrist flexor that attaches to that common flexor tendon has to absorb more of the force and therefore is more vulnerable to being overstressed. I think it's fair to say that this concept has not been adequately tested yet, but it is plausible, and it does also tally with my own anecdotal experience. Once I got golfer's elbow, as I said, I tried to back off from hard physical training. I stopped doing fingerboarding, I stopped doing rings or weights or basic body exercises, and just did climbing with the idea that that would rest that tendon. But that correlated with the tendon injury becoming worse and not better. And actually, after several years of having the injury, I reached a point where I felt like I had nothing to lose, and I started to experiment with doing the opposite. And actually I started to fingerboard more and do basic body strength exercises more than I had been doing previously, and that correlated with the injury improving. So I started to reintegrate a program of basic pull-ups and push-ups, floor exercises like plank, rings exercises like front lever, flies, skin the cat, all these basic exercises, and also fingerboarding, and also things like foot off bouldering, which is a sort of out of fashion training technique, which is very effective. Point 3 is to develop awareness, and then once you develop that awareness, don't ignore it. So what kind of awareness am I talking about? A key skill for any athlete is to develop an awareness of their recovery state from hour to hour, day to day, month to month. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Do you have a feeling of soreness, sluggishness, tiredness? Do you note aches and pains in your muscles, slowness in your movements? Or do you notice the opposite, a feeling of you're ready to train, you feel like you have lots of energy, you feel like your movements are fast and controlled? This is a subtle, difficult to quantify aspect of your readiness to train and state of general health, but it's very, very important. Medical staff, physiologists, universally recognise that although this aspect is very difficult to measure, it's very important, and it's a good measure. So if you wake up in the morning, or if you start to warm up for your training session and you don't really feel very good, you feel sore, tired, then that may inform your adjustments for that day to the actual training load that you do, potentially doing less or doing, well, there's several variables you can manipulate with your training. You can manipulate your intensity or your volume, so you could do still the same intensity of exercise but just less of it, or you could do less intensity but increase the volume, or you could switch focus and do an endurance session instead of a strength session if you don't feel sharp and you don't feel good. There are all these things you can manipulate, but underlying that is a basic awareness of how you feel. And also, when it comes to injury itself, an awareness of pain and the types of pain is absolutely critical. I noticed from discussions with many athletes over the years that different athletes are much better than others at describing the pain from an injury and how it changes. I won't go into all the intricacies of this. I have laid it out in Make or Break, but there are many different types of pain. I'm sure you recognise this as a basic concept, and that can help to inform you about the level of acute inflammation versus underlying damage. You will not know this for sure. It might not be a very objective measure, but again, it's a useful measure. In the particular case of golfer's elbow, which is a degenerative injury, it may not be advisable to only go to the limit of pain in your rehab or your normal climbing, and it may actually be advisable to tolerate some mild level of pain during these activities. And that is because there's a fundamental difference between an acute tearing of tissue and that slow onset injury. In golfer's elbow or any slow onset degeneration, there is ingrowth of blood vessels and nerves into the tendon, which should normally have not much blood vessels and very few nerves. So the tendon becomes much more sensitive and becomes much more pain sensitive. So activities which are not necessarily causing additional rapid damage to the tendon may cause some pain. Now, that's not to say that you should ignore all pain by any means. I am definitely not saying that. But there is evidence that doing rehab exercises that provoke a mild level of pain is acceptable and does lead to healing, perhaps because the tendon is so sensitive that almost doing anything causes it some pain, and that maybe a better measure to track would be the directionality of the pain. Is it getting worse or better? That might tell you more than the actual level of the pain. Point number 4 is don't stop moving. One of the quotes that's in Make or Break comes from a very prolific tendon researcher called Jill Cook, and the quote was, "Tendons don't like rest or change." And I really loved that quote. In a sense, it's like a one-line summary of what my book is all about. Fundamentally, the human body is designed to move. We know this from training. Everything about adaptation to training is about responding to movement or responding to lack of movement. And what happens when you stop training? You get weaker. And this is true for tendons as well. So rested tendons become weaker, they become less resilient. So we are trying to avoid periods of less intense activity wherever possible, both in prevention and also in treatment. A key question in this space is, why are tendon injuries so common? Despite our knowledge of training and our facilities to train, why are we not making an impact on the incidence of tendon injuries? And really, I think a prime suspect for the cause of that problem is our Western lifestyles, which involve a lot of time not moving at all. They also have a lot of periods of inactivity because our lives are so busy with so many things going on. So that could be very busy periods with work or family or injury itself. And those periods of inactivity are really, really bad for the body's health, and specifically tendon health and strength. So before you get an injury like golfer's elbow, then it's important to try and maintain a steady level of climbing or training activity with as few breaks as possible. Now, that's not to say that rest is not important. Rest is critical, and I'll come to that in a minute. And this is also true once you have an injury. If you think of the injured tendon in golfer's elbow, when I had my own tendon scanned with ultrasound to look for the areas of damage, what became clear to me, which I already knew from looking at the research, was that the area of damage was actually a very, very small part of the total tendon cross-sectional area. That is, almost all of the tendon, more than 90% of it, was completely healthy. and it was only a very small area of damage that was causing all of this pain. It felt to me subjectively like the tendon must be very badly damaged, and that is true when you look at some tendons which are badly injured, but in a lot of cases there's a lot of healthy tissue there, and so resting the damaged area causes the healthy area to become poorer in its tissue quality and more vulnerable to injury. So in recovering from injury, we are walking this line between not exceeding the capacity of the damaged area to tolerate load, with avoiding atrophy in the healthy tissue. So that's why, as a general rule in sports medicine, after an injury has occurred or has been treated even surgically, rehab programs are starting earlier and becoming more aggressive than was previously done in previous decades, where more rest was advised. However, all of that is not to say that rest is not important. Rest is absolutely critical. Most things in biology don't work as being either the on state or the off state is good. Usually fluctuations are key in many aspects of human health and physiology. If you can think of things like wakefulness and sleep, exercise and rest. And in the case of injury, that would be rehab exercises and rest. There's quite a strong focus in the discourse in sports medicine on the amount of rest, but I think a more important factor may be the quality of that rest. So is your sleep quality good enough and also long enough? And is your nutrition good enough? And I will come to that a bit later on. There is also one point I'd like to bring up about training, which is that sometimes you don't know or would never be able to identify what the key causative agent in your training routine or climbing routine may be that's helping to make an injury worse. So it may be that if you just have a change of scenery and just do something else, that you may find that your injury suddenly improves. You will never know why, because it's extremely difficult to tease out the different causes that may be important, but just having that change of scenery is enough. There is a fair bit of trial and error in any rehab program, and that may be one thing that is worth trying, is just a total change of scenery, a change of climbing wall, a change of your training routine, or doing something that's really quite different. That could be just doing a different climbing discipline. Like if you're focused on sport climbing and bouldering, maybe it'd be a good time to do a season of winter climbing or a season of trad climbing or something like that. Or it could be something much smaller, like just making a small change in the order of your training sessions or the amount of rest days you have. Maybe it's better to try spreading your training into smaller sessions on more days, or maybe doing the opposite. It's very difficult to know what would make the difference, but the important point is to try. But the overall goal here is to rest professionally, have top quality sleep, have top quality nutrition, and reduce the amount of total stress load that's in your life in order that you have room to recover from the injury you have. And what follows from that is point number 6, which is respect your circadian rhythm. There is more and more research coming out all the time showing really quite profound and amazing effects of just increasing the quality or the duration of your sleep, or other aspects of circadian rhythm regulation that help to improve the quality of your sleep, such as time-restricted feeding or manipulating the amount of blue light or the duration of blue light that you're exposed to during the day. And all of this helps to turn on wakefulness and maximize wakefulness in the morning. That is to have a good high quality breakfast and to see outdoor bright blue light in the morning, and then in the evening to have your last meal a little bit earlier to give yourself some time to start digestion before you go to bed, and also to minimize your exposure to blue light in the evening. This is really, really tough in our modern environment, especially if you live in a city and there's a lot of light pollution that's just all over the place. That's actually one of the reasons why I like to live in the mountains. And when I first moved away from the city to the mountains, I noticed the effect immediately. But still, like everyone else, I use a lot of screens. I make sure that I have a blue light filter on my computer. I also have my blue light blocking glasses. They look really, really silly, but they do work. Everything turns orange and you're filtering out the blue light, and that helps you to make enough melatonin to get to sleep quickly and have a good quality sleep. Almost anywhere you look in the medical literature, whether that be things like cancer occurrence or recurrence, whether that be muscle growth or muscle retention, whether that be recovery from a whole host of different diseases, but also some research starting to appear in the sports medical literature to do with recovering from sports injuries, that maintaining a good proper circadian rhythm with good wakefulness during the day and good rest, relaxation and sleep during the night is absolutely key. Sleep is the best performance enhancing drug that's ever been invented. Don't underestimate it. Point 7 is to keep training, in fact possibly do more. The key piece of learning that I had from my own journey with Golfer's Elbow was that backing off from my total volume and intensity of physical training had the opposite effect that I was looking for. It correlated with the injury getting worse. I can't say for sure whether that was causation or not, but it could be. As I was reaching the point of desperation to find some better answers on what to do with my rehab, I actually went to see a couple of the most prominent researchers in the field. It took a fair bit of work and also a bit of expense to get myself in front of them, but it was more than worth it. I was religiously doing my rehab exercises according to the protocols that were developed in the research papers that those researchers had published, and I'm thinking of people like Håkan Alfredsson and Nicola Maffuli, and I actually went to see both of them. I could see that there was some different protocols being used in the literature for the rehab exercises. Some people were saying do 3 sets of 15 reps in a day, some people were saying do double that or triple that, and I wasn't sure what to make of it, and so I was aware that sometimes having a face-to-face discussion with the researcher can give you a more nuanced opinion, or also their clinical experience of treating patients that has not yet made it to the research. And when I went to see those two researchers, they both said the same thing, which was incredibly useful, which was to do the same exercises that I was doing, but to do much more of them. In fact, to do them 180 reps of my eccentrics, which I'll come to in a second, and do that 7 days a week and not have any days off. Because what I was doing was I was doing the exercises, they were causing the elbow to become more painful, and because I still had that hardwired in my brain that pain equals you're going too far, which does not apply in the same way to this type of tendon injury, that I was backing off, and I just kept going back to square one and it wasn't working. And when I started to push through that and carry on with the exercises despite some mild pain, then I started to see some progress. And also when I started to incorporate more basic strength work, and again I was tolerating a little bit of pain, so I started to do things like pull-ups, foot-off bouldering, rings, floor exercises. I did see some pain in my elbows at first, for the first maybe 6 to 12 weeks, but then I did start to see some improvement. I could feel that I was moving the needle. So that follows to point number 8, which is to do heavy resistance training all the time. In Make or Break, I detailed the rehab exercises that are commonly used as a protocol for golfer's elbow or tennis elbow rehab in the literature. I also included a discussion of the available scientific literature that was there, and the reason I did that in such detail was because there's not complete agreement on what's the best protocol. And now Make or Break was published in 2014, and since then a number of other papers have come out and the field has shifted slightly, but the same theme applies, that the data appears inconclusive. So at the time of writing Make or Break, eccentric contractions were the gold standard exercise for improving tendinosis of golfer's elbow, but also other tendinosis and other tendons in the body. In the case of golfer's elbow, that would be to lift the weight with have a dumbbell in your hand, lift the weight to remove the concentric, that is the muscle shortening phase of the exercise, and then release it so that it's under tension, and then lengthen the muscle and tendon under the tension as the weight drops back down, and then lift back up to the start again. So you're taking out that concentric part and focusing on the eccentric lengthening of the tendon and the muscle. It's actually a great story of how Håkan Alfredsson discovered this protocol. I will link to an interview on the British Journal of Sports Medicine website where he details how he actually stumbled upon this as a potential treatment. He was a runner, and as he was training as an orthopaedic surgeon, he was suffering from Achilles tendinosis, as many runners do, and he was also learning to perform surgery on ruptured Achilles tendons. The Achilles is particularly prone to rupture, whereas the common flexor tendon doesn't really rupture very often at all. And he was unable to recover from the Achilles tendinosis, and he was treating these runners with ruptures and seeing them return to their running, and yet he was unable to return to his running. So he had this idea that if his tendon would only rupture, he could get the same surgery and then potentially recover like his patients. And so he was trying to encourage his professor who was tutoring him in surgery to perform the surgery, and he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. You haven't ruptured your tendon." So he actually did very heavy load eccentric contractions to try and stretch the tendon under load to the point where it would rupture, and then he could have the surgery. A classic athlete's intervention. It doesn't matter how extreme it is, I'm going to try it. But to his surprise, the tendon recovered on its own. So he started to do some early research studies looking at this, first in Achilles and then in elbows and other tendons. And there was some quite good evidence that it makes a difference. The reason why it makes a difference is still not completely understood, but it may be that eccentric stretching of the tendon allows the damaged area to finally achieve some tensile load in the direction of the fibers and then start to adapt to become normal tendon tissue again. Now, since 2014, there has been some other papers that have come out looking at isometric contractions. Now, if you can think of an isometric contraction, it just means that the muscle is not moving while it's under load. So the classic case is your fingers holding onto a hold. You contract the fingers and then the muscle is not moving. The fingers are not lengthening and closing, they're just staying still. So heavy load isometrics have also had some evidence of efficacy for treating tendinosis, but it's fair to say in the past 5 years that the evidence on this has been mixed. It is still unclear what the best protocol is. So what should a climber suffering from golfer's elbow right now do? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you what I would do, which is possibly to cover my bases and do both types of exercise, in fact all types of exercise. So I think the key aspect seems to be heavy load, and also the frequency with which the load is applied. So that would be daily exercise of quite high volume and quite high load. Now, possibly as a matter of prudence, you could do both the concentric, slow eccentric and isometric holds of the resistance that you're using. I don't know if that is best, but it's the best available evidence we have right now. A further point on this that's a bit more nuanced: if you see research like this that's being done looking at all of these different protocols for rehab, and they all work to some degree, but they're all much of a muchness, it seems unclear which is if any is really better. This is a very challenging thing to interpret. What should you do? There's a number of possibilities. It could be that eccentric contraction is best or isometric contraction is best, but it's simply that the studies that have been done are not sufficiently powered, they're not big enough or well designed enough to actually see the signal in the noise of the data that they're collecting. So it may be that there is an effect, but the studies have just not shown it yet. It's also plausible that these studies are essentially looking in the wrong place, if you like, and that the mode of exercise does not really matter that much, and that what matters may be something completely different. So I think that's something to keep in mind, and I always think to zoom out and continue to search for other things that work. And that comes to point 9, which is, if it's not working, keep looking for something else and keep changing and switching up the routine. One of the themes that I really noticed as I started to look through the whole of the physiotherapy research and tendon recovery research and basic tendon physiology as I was researching Make or Break was the weakness of a lot of the data. There's a lot in sports medicine that is unclear and we just don't really know. That's not to say we should ignore the available data, but it certainly doesn't tell us everything we need to know or tell the whole story, or not even close. And so I think when you're dealing with an injury right now that you have to try and recover from, then trial and error still plays a really important role. I think educated trial and error is the best way forward, really. And ideally working with a range of other people who maybe have different perspectives or opinions on what may be the best path. One real difficulty with this though is that slow onset tendon injuries are slow to recover. And so if you make an intervention, if you change the rehab program, then how long do you have to give it to tell whether it's worked or not? 6 weeks? 12 weeks? A year? These are a long period to take a gamble. And that's why I think you come back to that developing awareness, developing a sensitivity to how the tendon is responding. In order to heal, there has to be inflammation caused. You almost certainly with any activity, you will have a short-term increase in pain, and hopefully that's followed by a decrease. The pain level may shift and change, and I think it's critical to try and develop a really nuanced awareness of how the injury overall is progressing. That is a really challenging thing to do and a challenging thing to be objective about, but what else can you do but try? So don't stop striving to optimize, revisit and revise your rehab program according to how well the intervention is working. If it's not making much progress over significant time, and you may have to give it time to really know, then change it, do something else. And that was my whole experience. So everything that I learned in my research for Make or Break, I was able to make significant progress with my elbow tendinosis to the point where by 2016 I was back to normal training, and essentially the injuries were not dictating my training or climbing level to any measurable degree. However, the pain never went away completely, and I did feel at the time that that was just inevitable, that those tendons were old, battle scarred, damaged, and that some pain was inevitable. It was very, very mild, but it was still there, and I was kind of worried that, well, if it's still there, it could get worse. Now, people that follow me online may have already noticed that I have developed quite a strong interest in nutrition, because while changing my diet quite radically for a completely different purpose related to my body composition, I noticed that my general health, in fact, all aspects of my general health improved, and one of those was my elbow tendons. By the end of 2016, in the months after I made my quite dramatic diet changes, my elbow tendinosis completely disappeared for the first time in over 6 years. Now, I cannot say, and will never know, whether it was the diet changes or something else completely that caused the change, but a strong piece of evidence that it may have been related to it was that all of my health problems, it moved significantly in a positive direction, all at the same time. So, I mean, I'm unsure how to view this. Perhaps you can view it as being like the kind of final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, that I had all these other ingredients in place, and this was one that I finally got on top of, and it got me the last little bit to being fully healed. Another way to look at it could be that that was the problem all along, and had I made that change earlier, then perhaps all of the other stuff may not have been so necessary, or even not necessary at all. I don't know that for sure, and I think maybe it will be decades before, even longer than that, before research actually answers that question definitively. But nonetheless, that brings me to the last point, point 10, which is that your tendons are made of what goes in your mouth. Essentially, what any rehab activity does is transduce the load that you apply to a tendon and use substrate, that is actual raw materials for building tendon, and use that to actually build new tissue. So if that raw substrate coming in from your diet is not there, the adaptation cannot happen. And there is some good recent research showing that when you provide ample substrate for especially collagen synthesis, which is strongly dictated by the availability of two amino acids, glycine and proline, and also vitamin C. That there is significantly improved collagen deposition and increase in tendon strength when that's combined with a rehab program. And as a result, there is quite a strong movement in the supplement world, including actually within climbing, to promote the collagen as an actual supplement. I do not consume a collagen supplement myself, and I don't really see the need to, for one quite simple reason, which is that I prefer to get all of my nutrients from real food, because as a general rule, and obviously nutrition is an incredibly complex area, but often the execution of it can be quite simple. As a general rule, if you eat whole foods which are generally healthy, then you have availability of all of the right nutrients in the right balance. The only question remaining is what constitutes healthy food, and that is an area of considerable controversy and debate. But in brief, I can tell you that I make sure that I eat a lot of meat, especially meat on the bone and other animal products. And the reason for that is because the bioavailability of those basic amino acids like glycine and proline, but also all the other ones which must be consumed in balance, are all there. And all of the other micronutrients are all there also. You might wonder, what about the vitamin C? Well, I do also consume some of the low sugar fruits, things like peppers, berries, that kind of thing. But also I also eat some organ meats which contain vitamin C. And the dietary pattern that I follow may or may not, another matter of controversy, it may reduce the requirement for vitamin C for other metabolic purposes, freeing up more vitamin C for collagen and tendon health. I do not know if that's true or not true. However, I am trying to find an explanation for why my change in diet seemed to promote improved recovery in pre-existing injury that I had, and those injuries just disappeared. So I hope this video has been a nice complement to the interview that I did with Andrew, which very much focused on general concepts and showed you how you might dive into the details for one specific injury. And I will do future vlogs looking at other injuries, but I would encourage people before they get injured to read Make or Break, because prevention is really the cornerstone of remaining healthy and improving your climbing. But if you want to see future videos from me on this topic, please do subscribe and hit the notifications bell to make sure you see them, and I'll see you in the next video.